A fighter's arrogance, a woman's silent struggle, and the unexpected arrival that changes everything. Stay with us until the end. Like, comment, and subscribe. The sound of fists hit in heavy bags echoed through the wide hall of the UFC training gym. The space smelled of sweat, rubber mats, and disinfectant. Fighters moved around in constant rhythm, some sparring in the cage, others shadow boxing near the mirrors, while coaches barked instructions and clapped their hands. The atmosphere was alive, full of tension, energy, and discipline. At the very edge of the hall, unnoticed by almost everyone, a woman pushed a mop across the floor. Her name was Linda. She had been working here only a week, and every day felt like a test she wasn't sure she would pass. The job wasn't glamorous, not even close, but it was honest. She needed it. Rent was due, her bills stacked up, and this position, though small and hidden, at least offered steady income. Linda was in her mid-30s with short hair and a quiet demeanor. Her uniform was plain, dark blue, with a pocket on the chest where she kept a small folded cloth. She carried herself with dignity, but here, surrounded by men who lived and breathed combat, she felt out of place. Most fighters didn't even notice her. Those who did either gave her a passing glance or a dismissive smirk. She could feel the way her presence shifted the air, like she was an outsider in a world that had no place for her. As she wrung out her mop and returned to wiping the floor, she heard laughter behind her. At first, she ignored it. She knew well enough what laughter in her direction meant. But curiosity got the better of her, and she glanced up. Near the cage, one of the gym's most talked-about fighters was finishing his sparring. He was tall, muscular, with the confident swagger of someone used to being the center of attention. Sweat glistened across his chest as he stepped out, his gloves hanging loosely from his fists. His name was Marco. Even in the short time Linda had worked here, she had already heard stories about him. Undefeated in his last fights, known for his arrogance outside the ring as much as his aggression inside. Marco's eyes landed on her, and his grin widened. He nudged another fighter, gesturing toward Linda with his chin, and whispered something that made the others laugh. Linda lowered her gaze, focusing on her work, but she felt the burn of their attention. She moved to a corner to clean near the benches, hoping to disappear. She had always been good at that, becoming invisible, blending into the background. But the gym wasn't the kind of place where invisibility lasted long. As she cleaned, she let her mind wander. She thought about her first day, how intimidating it had felt walking through the glass doors into this temple of strength. The receptionist barely looked at her when giving her the cleaning supplies. The trainers hadn't bothered with greetings. She had told herself it didn't matter. She wasn't here for their approval. She was here to do her job, but still, deep down, she couldn't help but feel the sting of being overlooked, of being treated like furniture. Useful only when dirty, otherwise invisible. That evening, as the training session wound down, Linda gathered her supplies and made her way to the far side of the gym. Fighters were packing up, stretching, some lingering to joke with their teammates. She tried to stay out of their way, but her eyes caught the same figure again, Marco leaning against the cage, staring at her like a hunter sizing up prey. There was something unsettling in his gaze. She told herself not to think too much of it. People looked at her like that sometimes, with the kind of condescension that said, "You don't belong here." She had grown used to it. But the smirk on his face, the way he whispered to the man beside him, made her grip the mop handle tighter. Linda finished her shift quietly, but as she left the building, she couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to change. There was tension in the air, something building, like the silence before a storm. She had taken this job to survive, not to fight battles, yet fate seemed ready to test her in ways she never imagined. And in the shadows of that very gym, another figure was present. unnoticed like her. A man who came when the lights dimmed and the noise died down. He trained in silence, disciplined, watching. No one knew he was there, and no one had yet seen him step forward. But soon, Linda would. The next morning, the gym was as alive as ever. The clashing of gloves, the sound of ropes slapping against the floor, the grunts of fighters pushing themselves past their limits. Linda walked in quietly, clutching her cleaning supplies, reminding herself of her purpose. Do your job, get through the day, and keep your head down. But staying invisible wasn't as easy as she hoped. Marco, the fighter whose stare had burned through her the previous evening, was already in the cage, pounding into the pads held by his coach. His punches were thunderous, the kind that made other fighters pause and admire. Every strike carried not only power, but arrogance. He thrived on attention, and he knew exactly how to get it. When his eyes caught Linda across the gym, his smirk returned. He said something under his breath to his coach, who shook his head, clearly disapproving, but Marco didn't care. He was already walking toward her as she bent over to clean near the benches. "Hey," he said loudly, enough to turn a few heads. "You missed a spot." Linda froze for a second. Slowly, she looked up and saw him pointing at the floor, where there was no dirt, no stain, nothing. Just polished mat. "I just cleaned it," she answered quietly, keeping her tone calm. Marco laughed. "Then do it again. Maybe this time I'll see it shine." A couple of fighters nearby chuckled, following his lead. Linda felt the flush of heat rise to her face, but she held her composure. Without a word, she pushed the mop over the same spot, ignoring his presence. "Good girl," Marco said, his grin widening. "See? You're useful after all." Her grip on the mop tightened. She wanted to respond, to snap back, but the weight of the stairs around her held her tongue. She had been in situations like this before, where silence was the safer weapon. Still, the words cut deep, more painful than any physical blow could be. As she moved away, Marco wasn't finished. Later that afternoon, after his sparring session, he walked over again, this time holding an empty water bottle. Without hesitation, he dropped it at her feet. "Oops," he said mockingly. "Better pick that up before someone slips. Don't want to be responsible for injuring a future champion, right?" Fighters around them laughed. Linda bent down, her movements stiff, and picked it up. She could feel her dignity eroding piece by piece, yet she refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. She tossed the bottle into the bin and continued her work. But Marco kept going. The next day, he purposely spilled protein shake across the mats right in front of her. The thick, sticky liquid spread across the floor, and he stepped back, arms crossed, watching. "Looks like you've got work to do," he said. Linda kneeled down, wiping the mess as his friends laughed behind him. She could hear the whispers. Why does she even work here? She doesn't belong. She should be cleaning bathrooms, not walking around fighters. The humiliation was sharp, every word piercing her pride. She wanted to vanish into the walls, disappear completely, but she couldn't. She needed this job. By the end of the week, the routine was the same. Marco finding ways to single her out, testing how much he could push, while the others either laughed or stayed silent. The coaches tried not to get involved. Some of them frowned at his behavior, but no one confronted him. He was their rising star, their ticket to prestige. Linda went home each night exhausted, her chest heavy not from physical labor but from the weight of humiliation. She reminded herself why she was there: to survive, to pay her bills, to keep moving forward. But inside, something began to shift. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was patience, a quiet endurance she had learned long before she stepped into this gym. And though Marco believed he was breaking her, he was wrong. Every insult, every sneer, every forced humiliation, they were fueling something else inside her, something waiting. She didn't know it yet, but soon the line would be crossed. And when that happened, everything in the gym would change. The gym buzzed with its usual energy. Fighters trained relentlessly, their bodies slamming into pads, gloves cracking against heavy bags, sweat dripping onto the mats. Coaches yelled encouragement. Some barked criticism, and the steady hum of intensity filled every corner. Yet, beneath the noise, there was a tension, an unease that had begun to grow. Linda felt it every time Marco's eyes found her. She had survived a week of his taunts, insults, and petty humiliations. Each one cut her pride, but she endured. She reminded herself, just keep working, don't let him win. But Marco thrived on domination. The more she endured, the more he pushed. It was as if her silence challenged him, driving him to prove that she was beneath him. That afternoon, the gym was especially crowded. Fighters gathered around the cage, watching sparring sessions between rising talents. Linda quietly slipped to the far side, mopping the floor near the benches. She kept her head down, focusing on her task, hoping the day would pass without incident. But fate had other plans. Marco, fresh from a sparring round, sweat rolling down his muscular frame, noticed her. His chest heaved with adrenaline, and his grin was dangerous. He stepped out of the cage, ignoring his coach's attempt to call him back, and walked straight toward Linda. She sensed him before she saw him. The sound of his footsteps grew louder, and when she finally looked up, he was towering over her, blocking the light. "You still here?" he sneered. "You think this place is your home? This is a gym for fighters, not maids." Linda straightened slowly, clutching the mop handle like it might shield her. She said nothing. Silence had been her only defense, but this time Marco wasn't satisfied with silence. "Look at me when I talk to you," he barked, his voice echoing across the gym. Heads turned. Fighters paused mid-training. Some smirked, others frowned, but no one stepped forward. They knew Marco's temper. Linda lifted her eyes, calm but unflinching. That calmness only enraged him more. "You think you're tough?" he growled. Then, before she could react, he dropped his gloves to the floor and lunged. His arm shot out, snaking around her neck, yanking her into a tight chokehold. Gasps rippled through the gym. A few fighters laughed nervously, thinking it was a joke, but it wasn't. Linda's world spun. She felt his forearm press against her throat, cutting off her air. She clawed at his arm, but his grip tightened. The mop clattered to the ground, useless. Her chest heaved, desperate for oxygen as the sound of blood pounded in her ears. "See?" Marco shouted, holding her up like a trophy. "Even trash like this can be a sparring dummy." Some laughed louder, others shifted uncomfortably. One coach took a hesitant step forward but stopped when Marco's glare warned him off. The gym was frozen between complicity and fear. Linda's vision blurred. Her knees buckled, and she felt herself slipping into darkness. She had never felt so powerless, so utterly at the mercy of another's cruelty. Marco tightened his grip, his face twisted with arrogance. "This is what happens when you forget your place." And then, suddenly, there was a voice, calm, strong, cutting through the chaos. "That's enough." The gym fell silent. Marco turned, still holding Linda in the choke. His eyes narrowed at the figure stepping out of the shadows near the far wall. It was a man, tall, with a steady, deliberate stride. His presence alone shifted the air, commanding attention without force. He wore a simple white training kimono, its belt tied neatly at his waist. His face, though older, carried the unmistakable sharpness of discipline, strength, and years of mastery. Jean-Claude Van Damme. No one had expected him. No one even knew he had been there. Yet here he was, standing at the edge of the mats, his eyes locked on Marco, his voice unwavering. "Let her go," Van Damme said, his tone calm but absolute. Marco scoffed, tightening his hold on Linda. "What's this? The movie star thinks he's a hero? This is real life, old man. Stay out of it." Van Damme's gaze didn't waver. "I said, let her go." Linda's body sagged, her strength fading as Marco's arm constricted tighter. Her breaths came in short, desperate bursts. Her fingers clawed weakly at his arm. The world dimmed at the edges of her sight. Marco smirked, looking at the legend before him. "What if I don't?" Van Damme stepped forward, slow and deliberate. Every fighter in the gym felt the shift, the storm that was about to break. For the first time since she started working here, Linda wasn't completely alone. And for the first time in his life, Marco was about to learn what it meant to underestimate someone. The gym, usually loud and chaotic, went unnaturally still. The sound of fists hitting bags, ropes skipping, of trainers shouting commands. All of it fell into silence. All eyes turned to the man who had stepped out from the shadows, his presence commanding the room without effort. Jean-Claude Van Damme stood with the calm posture of someone who had nothing to prove, yet carried the weight of decades of mastery in every step. Linda could barely focus. Her chest heaved with shallow breaths as Marco's forearm remained locked around her neck. The edges of her vision darkened, and dizziness washed over her. But even through the haze, she saw the man in white, the man who didn't look afraid, who looked at Marco as if he had already measured him and found him lacking. Marco sneered, shifting his weight, pulling Linda closer to him like a shield. "You've got to be kidding me," he said loudly, his voice mocking. "Van Damme, what is this? Some action movie cameo? You think anyone here cares?" The fighters around the cage looked at one another, uncertain. They knew Marco's reputation, his brutal temper. But Van Damme's name wasn't just famous, it was legend. Seeing him here, dressed in a white kimono, felt unreal, as though the walls of the gym had been pulled into a film, only this wasn't scripted. Van Damme's expression never changed. His voice was even, carrying across the room. "Let her go." Now, the tone wasn't a plea, it wasn't anger, it was a command. And for a moment, even Marco felt it in his chest. But arrogance was stronger than instinct. He chuckled, his grip on Linda tightening. "Or what? You'll do a split and scare me off?" Laughter broke out among a few of Marco's friends, but it was nervous laughter, too loud, too forced. The tension in the gym was suffocating. Van Damme took another step forward. His eyes were locked on Marco, not even flicking toward Linda. He didn't need to. He had already calculated everything. The distance, the angle, the breathing, the weakness in Marco's stance. Years of discipline had honed him into someone who didn't react. He acted. "I said," Van Damme repeated, his tone sharp now, "let her go." For a moment, Marco hesitated. His pride screamed at him to stand firm, to show dominance. But something about the older man's steady gaze unsettled him. He wasn't looking at a has-been actor. He was looking at a warrior who had lived his craft, who had survived battles far beyond showmanship. Marco snarled and pushed Linda forward, releasing her roughly. She stumbled, gasping for air, collapsing to the mat as she clutched her throat. The mop still lay a few feet away, abandoned like a fallen weapon. "Fine," Marco growled, cracking his neck, stepping toward Van Damme. "You want me? You've got me." The fighters in the gym instinctively moved back, forming a circle around the two men. Coaches didn't intervene. They knew this was beyond them now. Phones discreetly lifted, recording. The entire gym had transformed into an arena. Van Damme bowed his head slightly, his hands loose at his sides, his breathing calm. Marco, bouncing on his feet like an eager predator, smirked at him. "You're out of your league, old man." "I'm not some stunt double. I'm the real deal." Van Damme spoke softly, just loud enough for him to hear. "The real deal doesn't choke women to prove his strength." The words cut deep, sharper than any punch. Marco's smirk faltered for just a second, and rage replaced it. He charged forward, fists swinging, aiming for Van Damme's face. But the legend was already moving. With a swift sidestep, Van Damme let the punch sail past him, his hand snapping out to redirect Marco's momentum. Marco stumbled but caught himself, snarling as he spun back around. The crowd gasped. It had begun. Linda, still on the floor, forced herself upright against the wall. Her throat burned, her lungs screamed, but her eyes stayed locked on the scene before her. This wasn't just a fight between two men. This was justice walking into her world, taking shape in the form of a man she had never expected to see. And though the outcome hadn't yet been written, deep down, she felt the tide had already turned. The gym pulsed with a different kind of energy now. Every fighter, coach, and spectator formed a circle around the mats, their voices hushed, their breaths held. No one dared interrupt. It was as if the air itself knew something historic was about to happen. Marco bounced lightly on his toes, his body glistening with sweat, his grin twisted into a mask of fury. He spat on the mat, glaring at Van Damme with a mix of contempt and challenge. "You're not in a movie now," he snarled. "You're in my cage." Van Damme stood tall, relaxed, his stance deceptively casual. His eyes were calm, steady, and unshaken. His breathing was measured, every muscle under control. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Silence was his weapon, and in that silence, Marco felt the first stirrings of unease. The crowd edged closer, phones raised, eyes wide. Linda, still leaning against the wall, rubbed her throat, her breath ragged. Pain lingered in her chest, but her focus was locked on Van Damme. She whispered to herself, barely audible, "Please, win." The first move came fast. Marco lunged, throwing a heavy right hook aimed at Van Damme's jaw. The punch was brutal, raw power behind it, the kind of strike that had ended fights in seconds. But Van Damme slipped just enough, letting the fist cut through air. With the same fluid motion, he tapped Marco's ribs with a sharp counter. Precise, controlled, a strike meant not to end the fight but to sting and warn. The gym erupted with gasps. Marco staggered back, clutching his side for a moment, but his pride burned hotter than the pain. He roared and rushed forward again, this time launching a flurry of punches and kicks. His fists blurred, his shin cracked against the mats as he swung wildly, trying to crush Van Damme with sheer force. But Van Damme was water. He flowed, weaving between the attacks with the grace of years of mastery. Every dodge was exact, every counter measured. His footwork was light, his balance unshaken, while Marco grew more reckless with every strike. The younger fighter shouted through clenched teeth, "Stand still!" Another kick came, high, furious, aimed for Van Damme's head. But the legend caught it midair, twisting his body and sweeping Marco's other leg from beneath him. The fighter crashed onto the mat with a thunderous thud, the entire gym flinching at the impact. Marco scrambled to his feet, rage distorting his face. Humiliation simmered in his veins. He attacked again, this time feinting low before throwing a sharp uppercut. It almost connected, but Van Damme leaned back, the glove grazing only the air in front of his chin. And then, like lightning, Van Damme struck. A spinning heel kick, fast, precise, perfectly timed, whipped through the air and landed clean against Marco's temple. The sound cracked through the gym like a gunshot. Marco's body twisted, his legs buckled, and he crashed to the mat, stunned, dazed, struggling to regain balance. The crowd gasped, then fell silent. Van Damme didn't pounce. He didn't need to. He stepped back, allowing Marco to stumble upright, his legs shaky, his arrogance crumbling. "You've already lost," Van Damme said quietly. His voice was firm but not triumphant. Marco roared one last time, charging blindly, throwing every ounce of power he had left into a final attack. But Van Damme sidestepped with surgical precision and drove his fist straight into Marco's midsection, knocking the air from his lungs. Before the fighter could collapse, Van Damme swept his legs once more and pinned him to the ground with effortless control. Marco thrashed, but the grip was unbreakable. Van Damme leaned close, his voice low, only for him to hear. "Strength isn't about hurting those weaker than you. That's cowardice, and today everyone sees you for what you are." Marco's body went limp. His pride shattered, his defeat undeniable. The gym erupted, not in cheers, not in applause, but in stunned silence that carried more weight than any roar of victory. Van Damme stood, releasing his opponent, and stepped back with quiet dignity. He didn't raise his arms, didn't celebrate. The fight was over, but it hadn't been about glory. It had been about truth. Linda, tears streaming down her cheeks, pressed a hand to her chest. Relief washed over her like a tide. For the first time since she'd entered this gym, she felt seen, defended, valued. And, for the first time, Marco wasn't the predator. He was prey, broken, humiliated, defeated in front of the very people who once admired him. The balance of power in the gym had shifted forever. The silence in the gym was heavy, thicker than any roar of applause could have been. The fighters, trainers, and even the staff who had peeked in from the hallway stood frozen, processing what they had just witnessed. Marco, the man who had strutted like a king, who had terrorized anyone he saw as weaker, now lay sprawled on the mat, humiliated, broken not by sheer force but by the precision and composure of a man who hadn't even come here to fight. Van Damme didn't linger over his victory. He stepped back calmly, his breathing steady, his stance returning to one of quiet discipline. He didn't look at the crowd, didn't wait for approval. His eyes turned only toward Linda. She was still pressed against the wall, clutching her throat, her body trembling from the lingering ache of Marco's chokehold. But her gaze met Van Damme's, and in that gaze was gratitude so deep it went beyond words. She forced herself onto unsteady feet, her knees shaken, and whispered, "Thank you." Van Damme gave a single nod. He didn't need more. The coaches finally moved. Two of them rushed to Marco, who was groaning, trying to sit up but failing miserably. His pride was in ruins, shattered more deeply than his body. Whispers filled the room now, quiet but sharp, words cutting through the silence. "I can't believe he did that to her. He's finished here. He's not a fighter. He's a disgrace." For the first time, no one admired him, no one laughed at his cruelty, no one celebrated his strength. Instead, they looked at him with disgust, their respect stripped away. The head coach, an older man with gray at his temples, stepped forward, his voice grim. "Marco," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument, "you're done here. Pack your things, you don't represent this gym anymore." Marco's eyes widened, his mouth opening to protest, but the words never came. The truth was undeniable. Everyone had seen what he was. No excuses could rewrite it. The circle of fighters parted, leaving him exposed, alone, and disgraced. He staggered toward the locker room, his shoulders hunched, His arrogance dissolved into shame. Linda watched, her chest still rising and falling with uneven breaths. The sight of his downfall didn't erase her pain, but it gave her something she hadn't felt in a long time: justice. Van Damme walked toward her, each step quiet, unhurried. He stopped at arm's length, studying her for a moment. His words, when they came, were soft but strong. "Remember this. Real strength is never proven by hurting those who cannot fight back. It is proven by how you choose to protect them." Linda's eyes filled with tears. She nodded, her voice trembling but clear. "I'll never forget." And then, as quietly as he had appeared, Van Damme turned and walked toward the exit. No dramatic flourish, no basking in the moment. He simply left, his presence lingering like a shadow of discipline and honor. The door closed behind him, but the lesson he left behind stayed in every corner of the gym. The fighters slowly returned to their routines, but nothing was the same. Conversations were hushed, movements more deliberate. Everyone had seen the line between arrogance and true mastery, between cruelty and justice, and they knew which side they wanted to stand on. Linda bent down and picked up her mop. Her throat still hurt, her hands still shook, but when she looked up again, the way people saw her had changed. No longer invisible, no longer the easy target of mockery, she was the woman who had endured humiliation and witnessed justice delivered in her defense. Respect now followed her steps where once there had been indifference. As she left the gym that evening, the air felt different. She breathed more deeply, the weight on her chest lighter than before. For the first time in weeks, she didn't dread coming back the next day, because she knew she wasn't alone anymore. And though Van Damme was gone, his words echoed in her mind. Strength was not in domination, but in protection, and that truth would remain with her forever. Justice was served, but the lesson remains. True strength protects, not destroys. What do you think? Share your thoughts in the comments, subscribe, and don't miss the next story.